The sun was just beginning to slice through the early morning fog over Fort Bragg, painting the parade field in streaks of gold and gray. The dew clung to the grass, dampening the boots of soldiers who shuffled into formation with the quiet hum of exhaustion, anticipation, and nerves. Captain Emily Reeves, standing at the far edge of the field, felt each droplet of moisture soak through her running shoes and tug at the sides of her tight PT pants. She tightened the drawstring on her waistband, straightened her shoulders, and tried to look strong, professional, in control. But her leg throbbed beneath the fabric, a constant reminder that she wasn't as invincible as she appeared. Colonel Mark Halstead's voice cut across the field like a whip. Broad-shouldered, square-jawed, with silver streaking through his cropped hair, Halstead had been in the army long enough to scare generations of soldiers with nothing more than a glance. Emily had heard the stories, how he could break rookies before breakfast, how he made seasoned officers second-guess their choices. He stopped in front of the formation, chest out, eyes scanning every face. Then he locked onto hers. "Captain Reeves," he barked. The sound ricocheted off the distant buildings, leaving a shiver through the assembled company. 20 minutes late on yesterday's run. Care to explain? Emily's stomach dropped. She had rehearsed anything over the past hour, but the words stuck in her throat like concrete. The colonel's eyes narrowed, a mixture of challenge and skepticism, and Emily felt the weight of the entire company pressing down on her shoulders. Soldiers glanced at her sideways. A few whispered. "Sir," Emily started, her voice low but firm. "With respect, there's a reason I—" Halstead interrupted with a scoffing laugh. "Oh, I'm sure there is, Captain. Another mystery injury, another condition we should all bow down to." His tone dripped with derision. He took a slow, deliberate step closer. "We're all in this together, Captain. Or are you saying you're above the rest of us?" Heat flared inside her chest, not from the July sun but from the sting of humiliation. Emily's jaw tightened. She wasn't one to beg. She wasn't one to hide, but some truths had to be protected, buried deep, even from those who outranked her. She had tried for weeks to explain, to drop subtle hints, to request evaluation without triggering Halstead's disdain. Nothing had worked. And now she stood there under the unforgiving scrutiny of the man who could make or break her career, feeling exposed. I need to be evaluated, sir," she said, her voice quivering just slightly, betraying the tension she'd been keeping at bay. "Something's wrong with my—" "Captain Reeves," Halstead barked again, this time louder, "at 0700 you will run the 5-mile, and you will beat your last time. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Emily replied, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt inside. "Good," he said, spinning on his heel. "Dismissed." And just like that, the weight of his judgment lingered even as he strode away. Emily exhaled, trying to steady her breathing. She looked down at her right leg, the one that had betrayed her more times than she could count. Her fingers brushed over her PT pants. If she were honest, the limp was visible now, slight but unmistakable. She had spent weeks hiding it, pushing through each training session, each evaluation, each scolding. She had pushed herself past pain that would have kept most soldiers in bed. But now, under the harsh glare of the morning sun, with the colonel's shadow lingering, she realized the truth. She couldn't run today. Not without risking serious injury. Not without exposing herself in a way she had spent months avoiding. Emily swallowed hard. She had choices: ignore the pain, push herself, risk permanent damage, or finally admit the truth. Either choice carried consequences, both professional and personal. The colonel didn't understand injuries like hers. He saw weakness as failure. She had learned that lesson the hard way. 2 years ago, she had survived an explosion in Iraq that left her with a mangled leg and nerves that didn't fully heal. She had fought through surgeries, rehabilitation, and endless PT sessions just to get back on her feet. And she had succeeded. Until now, until this exact moment. Around her, soldiers began their warm-up stretches, the slap of sneakers on wet grass, the rhythmic inhalation and exhalation of breath mixing with the hum of cicadas, and the distant rumble of military trucks. Emily tried to focus on them, on the cadence of the field, but every movement reminded her of the underlying pain. Every flex of her leg sent a sharp, electric sting up her thigh, making her wince. She forced herself to take a deep breath, to push the sensation aside. Soldiers had noticed her subtle limp, but none dared comment, out of respect or perhaps fear of the colonel's wrath. Emily glanced at her watch. 60 minutes until the 5-mile run. 60 minutes to decide whether she would push herself into agony or finally admit what had been hidden for too long. Time stretched and twisted, dragging the heat of the sun with it. Sweat began to bead on her forehead, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand. She had trained herself to mask pain, to present an image of stoicism, but the truth was a living, burning entity in her leg, pulsing with every heartbeat. She pictured the desert 2 years ago. The convoy, the explosion, the sudden sharp impact that lifted her Humvee, the smell of burning diesel, the screams of her soldiers, the fire that licked the edges of metal and flesh alike. She remembered the shrapnel slicing through muscle, the blinding light, and the terror in her eyes as she realized her leg would never be the same. She remembered survival, slow and painstaking recovery, each step a battle against her own body. And now, under the watchful eye of Colonel Halstead, she faced another battlefield, one of perception, of pride, of command, of legacy. She could hide it no longer. The thought struck her with a clarity both terrifying and liberating. One way or another, the truth would come out today. Emily exhaled again, slow and deliberate, feeling the tension knotting her shoulders. The soldiers were beginning to form a loose perimeter around the track. Whispers circled, speculation, concern, curiosity. Emily had always been their captain, their leader, the one who set the pace, the one who had earned their respect through action, not words. But now, as she looked at their faces, she saw the questions in their eyes. She saw worry. She saw doubt. And she realized something else. They deserved the truth. Not excuses, not a lie, the truth. Her fingers grazed the PT pants again. The fabric covered the scar, the legacy of war she had carried silently for too long. She clenched her fists. It hurt to think about exposing it, not because it was shameful, but because it represented everything she had survived, everything she had endured, and everything she feared might unravel if anyone else saw it. She pushed herself up, straightening her posture as best she could. The colonel had issued his command. The clock was ticking. 60 minutes until the whistle. 60 minutes to make the decision that could define the rest of her career. And in that silent, suspended moment, Emily realized she had a choice. Continue hiding, risking permanent damage and humiliation, or finally reveal the truth, shattering the illusion of perfection she had maintained at great personal cost. She exhaled one last time, slow and deliberate, letting the tension roll out of her in a small, almost invisible wave. Her leg pulsed beneath the fabric, the ache sharp but manageable. The sun glinted off the dew-drenched grass, painting the world in streaks of gold and gray. Soldiers shuffled, voices murmured, and in the distance, the colonel's gaze swept across the formation like a hawk scanning for weakness. Emily took a final deep breath. She could run, she could push, she could collapse and risk permanent damage, or she could finally tell the truth. A bead of sweat traced the side of her temple. The whistle would blow soon, and when it did, everything would change. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, Emily realized that hiding wasn't going to protect her anymore. It was time to face the colonel. It was time for the truth. And with that, she took a step forward, letting the weight of the moment settle over her like armor. The parade field was silent. The soldiers were watching. The colonel was waiting. And Emily Reeves, battle-hardened, scarred, and determined, was about to reveal a secret that would shock them all. Emily Reeves sat on the edge of the metal bench outside the motor pool, the early morning sun striking her face with a harsh glare. The faint hum of the bass surrounded her, vehicles rolling, boots crunching on gravel, distant shouts echoing across the compound. But inside, she was somewhere else entirely. Her right leg throbbed with a relentless, searing pain that no amount of stretching, ice, or determination could fully quiet. She had trained herself to ignore it, to mask the limp, to pretend the nerve damage from Iraq had healed. But it hadn't. And now, after the colonel's scolding, After the looming 5-mile run, the truth pressed against her chest like a fist. She flexed her toes inside her sneakers. Sharp jolts of pain ran through her calf, up her thigh, and into her hip. Emily swallowed, trying to steady her breath to block out the heat of the day and the humiliation that had already begun to coil in her stomach. She had a choice: push herself, risk collapse and be mocked, or finally confront the reality that she had been hiding from everyone, even herself. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to the desert 2 years ago. Iraq. The memory was vivid, almost unbearably so, the kind that didn't fade but lingered, tattooed onto the nerves and muscles as surely as the scar on her thigh. The convoy had been routine. Sand stretched endlessly in every direction, a pale, shimmering horizon that seemed to blur into the sky. The sun beat down with a relentless intensity, heating the metal of the Humvee until it radiated into their skin. Emily had been focused, scanning the horizon, ears straining for any hint of trouble. Then, without warning, a flash, a blinding, violent light, followed by a concussive wave that threw her against the frame of the vehicle. She remembered the smell first: burning rubber, diesel, gunpowder. Then the sound, a deafening roar that didn't stop when she covered her ears, the screams of soldiers around her blending into a chaotic, horrifying symphony. Her legs had buckled beneath her. She felt fire and metal rip through her, an instant of pure, sharp agony as shrapnel tore into her right thigh. She had survived, barely. She remembered the medic pulling her from the wreckage, his hands steady but his eyes wide with urgency. She had felt the wetness of blood, not just on her skin but soaking into the fabric of her uniform, the heat of it mingling with the desert sun. The Humvee smoldered behind them, a twisted sculpture of metal, glass, and dust. Her mind had screamed in disbelief. How could this be happening? How could she survive something so catastrophic? The evacuation, the surgeries, the weeks in the field hospital, they all blurred together. Pain became routine. Recovery became a measured, painful endurance. Emily had learned to walk again, to push through the nerve damage, to trick her body into obedience. But the leg never fully healed. There was always a twinge, a weakness, a subtle limp that she masked with training, with focus, with sheer will. She flexed her leg now, feeling the ache flare again. It was as if the desert itself had reached into her thigh and reminded her that the past was not finished with her. She had buried it deep, beneath layers of professionalism, toughness, and silence. But secrets, like scars, refused to stay hidden forever. Emily glanced up at the formation on the track. Soldiers jogged in tight, disciplined circles, their movements smooth and controlled, unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant of the storm raging inside her. She saw them glance at her, whispers circulating like ghostly wind. "Captain Reeves, is she okay? She looks hurt. Why doesn't the colonel call it off?" The thought of their concern made her chest tighten. They deserved better than secrecy. They deserved a leader who was honest, even if it meant showing weakness. But weakness in Halstead's eyes was unpardonable. She knew that. And so she had continued to hide, even as every fiber of her being screamed that hiding came with its own dangers. Her eyes drifted toward the distant horizon, and the desert seemed to stretch out before her again. The memory of that day played like a warped film reel. The flash, the fire, the chaos, the pain. She could feel the shrapnel fragments still lodged beneath her skin, small but constant irritants that reminded her she had survived something most people never would. She had returned from war not whole, not unscarred, but alive, and she had fought tooth and nail to reclaim her body and her career. But today, on this hot July morning, all of that training, all of that endurance, all of that survival seemed fragile. The colonel's mocking tone echoed in her ears. Another invisible problem. She had hoped to outlast his skepticism. She had hoped to prove herself through action, through sheer will. But now, with the whistle for the 5-mile run approaching, she realized that some truths could not be outrun. Emily pressed her palm against the scar hidden beneath her PT pants, feeling the raised edges, the uneven texture that reminded her every second of the fragility of survival. For months, she had buried this pain beneath routine, beneath discipline, beneath the relentless drive to appear unbreakable. But discipline could only carry her so far. Physical resilience had its limits. The nerve damage in her leg was not an illusion. It was a constant, burning reality. She clenched her fists, trying to gather the courage she would need for what was coming. Running on this leg would not just be difficult, it could be catastrophic. She could collapse, exacerbate the nerve injury, maybe even risk permanent damage. But halting now, refusing the colonel, might be seen as insubordination, a weakness. Her gaze flicked to the other soldiers again. They were watching her, waiting, expecting. Emily realized that in their eyes she was more than herself. She was a symbol of leadership, of toughness, of endurance. She could not fail, not just for herself, but for them. And yet the truth sat heavy in her chest, a weight she could no longer ignore. Emily exhaled, letting the cool morning air fill her lungs and settle her racing heart. The time for hiding was slipping away with every passing second. The whistle would blow soon. The colonel would be watching. The soldiers would be watching. And she had only one choice left: confront her body, confront the colonel, and confront the reality that she had been running from for far too long. She adjusted her PT pants, flexed her ankle one last time, and stood. Pain shot through her leg, sharp and punishing, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Each step toward the track was measured, deliberate, a negotiation between courage and fear. The soldiers fell silent as she entered the perimeter. Their whispers stopped. The hum of the bass seemed to fade, leaving only Emily, her throbbing leg, and the looming figure of Colonel Halstead. His eyes met hers, piercing, assessing, waiting. Emily took a deep breath. Her chest ached, not from exertion but from anticipation. The colonel had demanded action. The field awaited her obedience. And beneath it all, a storm of emotions, fear, shame, pride, and determination, swirled in her gut. She knew that in the next few moments, her life, her career, and the perception of everyone watching hung in the balance. One choice, one movement, one revelation could change everything. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the field. Emily Reeves, battle-hardened and scarred, prepared to take the step that would define her, one that would expose the truth she had fought so hard to hide. She took that step. The whistle shrieked across the field, cutting through the morning heat like a blade. Emily Reeves planted her feet on the track, her pulse hammering in her ears. Around her, the soldiers shifted into position, their synchronized movements a testament to hours of discipline, training, and obedience. But for Emily, the world had narrowed into a tunnel of pain, anticipation, and the looming shadow of Colonel Halstead. She clenched her fists at her sides, forcing her shoulders back, taking a slow, steadying breath. This was not just a run. It was a test, a confrontation with every lie she had told herself and everyone else since returning from Iraq. The scar on her right thigh pulsed beneath the fabric of her PT pants, a constant reminder of survival and sacrifice. For years, she had hidden it, pushing herself through pain and training, ignoring the whispered warnings of her own body. Now, in front of the colonel and the entire unit, hiding was no longer an option. "Move out," the whistle cried again, and the unit surged forward, a wave of synchronized energy pounding against the dewy track. Emily pushed off with her left leg, letting the momentum carry her, her right leg trailing slightly behind. The first few hundred meters were manageable. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of her steps, on keeping pace. Soldiers passed her with practiced ease, some shooting glances in her direction, concern, curiosity, admiration, pity, but Emily didn't falter. Her chest heaved, sweat dripping into her eyes, stinging. The early July sun beat down on her back, turning her shirt into a clingy second skin. Her legs burned, her right thigh screaming in protest with each step. The nerve pain shot up into her hip, a reminder that no amount of conditioning could erase the damage the desert had left behind. She swallowed the pain, grinding her teeth, focusing on the cadence of her breathing. One step, then the next. 1 mile, then another. But by the second mile, the reality hit. The nerve flare in her leg intensified, sharp and electric. Her right knee buckled slightly, forcing her to adjust her stride, her left leg compensating for the weakness. Every step was a negotiation between endurance and collapse. Emily's chest tightened, not just from exertion but from the suffocating weight of anticipation. She could see the colonel at the far side of the track, arms crossed, his eyes narrowing. His posture radiated expectation, challenge, and impatience. "Captain Reeves," his voice cut through the morning air like a whip, "pick up the pace, is that all you've got?" Emily's vision narrowed, the sound of her own ragged breathing becoming deafening. She wanted to shout, to scream, to tell him everything, the scar, the pain, the aftermath of Iraq, but she clenched her teeth. She couldn't. Not yet. Not here. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion, sweat matting her hair to her forehead. The third mile approached, and the pain escalated, a hot, stabbing sensation that radiated from her thigh to her hip. Her form faltered, her pace slowed. Soldiers began to notice the limp that had been subtle in the beginning now becoming pronounced. "She's hurt," one whispered to another. "Why isn't the colonel stopping her?" Emily's lungs burned, each inhalation sharp and punishing. Her leg threatened to give way. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to collapse, to fall to the ground and let the medic pull her to safety. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had survived worse. She had endured worse. And she would not break, not in front of them. The fourth mile hit. Her right leg faltered violently, forcing her to stumble, barely catching herself before she crashed to the track. Pain radiated through her entire body. Emily felt herself on the edge of collapse. Her mind raced. One more step and it could be permanent. She could tear the nerve further. She could fall. She could ruin everything she had rebuilt. Then a flash of memory, Iraq, the explosion, the searing fire, the Humvee, the blood, the screaming, the terror, and the will to survive that had carried her through the desert, through surgeries, through rehab, through every PT session since. That same will surged in her chest, hot and unrelenting. She gritted her teeth, forcing her legs to move. One step, one more. By the fifth mile, Emily could barely stand. Her vision blurred at the edges, sweat streaming down her face. Her leg throbbed with a deep electric pain, and she knew she could not complete the mile without exposing the truth. She faltered, dropping to her knees on the track. Gasps rippled through the formation behind her. Some soldiers froze, unsure what to do. Others looked horrified. "Captain Reeves," Halstead's voice thundered, approaching with the unmistakable cadence of a predator closing in. "Stop, or do you intend to embarrass yourself further?" Emily pressed her palms into the hot track, her fingers trembling. She could barely lift her head. The pain was excruciating, every nerve in her thigh screaming. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. And then, slowly, deliberately, she did something she had not done in years. She began to roll up the pant leg, inch by inch, exposing the deep, jagged scar that carved down her thigh. For a moment the world seemed to freeze. The sun glinted off the scar, highlighting the uneven ridges, the puckered skin, the testament to a battle fought far from this field. Soldiers gasped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The track seemed impossibly wide, the air thick with tension, anticipation, and disbelief. Halstead froze. His arms dropped slightly, his jaw tightening. The mocking, imperious glare that had defined his presence moments ago faltered. For the first time in her career, Emily saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had expected an excuse, another story, another weak rationale for poor performance. What he saw instead was raw truth, visible and undeniable. Emily's voice, trembling but clear, broke the silence. "Sir, you still think this is an excuse?" The soldiers around her stared, some openly stunned, others looking down, unsure where to place their attention. Emily pressed her palms harder into the track, the heat searing her skin, pain radiating up her leg, but she held herself upright, unwavering. She would not bow. She would not apologize for surviving. The colonel stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as though approaching a live mine. His eyes studied the scar, her form, the tremble in her hands, the courage in her gaze. The air was thick, charged with an electric tension that made the sweat on Emily's brow sting. The world seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers, trainers, even the distant hum of the bass faded into a background murmur. All that existed was Emily, the scar, and the colonel. Emily inhaled, trying to steady herself. Every fiber of her being screamed with pain and pride. Every step she had taken to this point, the rehab, the PT, the hiding, the pushing, led her here. She had survived a war. She had survived being dismissed. She had survived every challenge that dared to break her. And now, on the hot, dew-slick track, with the sun glaring overhead, she had finally revealed the truth. The colonel's voice, when it came, was quieter, measured, almost unfamiliar. "Captain Reeves, tell me everything." Her chest ached, her leg pulsed, and the world spun. But for the first time in years, Emily felt seen. Not mocked, not dismissed, not tested, seen. And she knew that this moment, this revelation, would change everything. The track fell silent, the rhythm of running boots replaced by the sound of a single heartbeat, the one belonging to Emily Reeves, echoing in her ears louder than any whistle, louder than any voice. Sweat clung to her temples, matting strands of brown hair to her forehead, while the sun beat down with relentless intensity. The scar on her right thigh glimmered in the light, deep, jagged, undeniable. It was a map of survival, a road through fire and blood, a testament to battles fought far from the parade field at Fort Bragg. And now, for the first time, it was visible to the world, visible to Colonel Mark Halstead, visible to her soldiers, visible to herself in the glaring clarity of truth. For a long moment, Halstead didn't move. His eyes widened ever so slightly, and his arms, which had been rigid in expectation and authority just minutes before, relaxed slightly at his sides. There was a hesitation there, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Emily's chest tighten with a combination of anxiety and anticipation. She had waited for this confrontation for months, wondered if it would ever come, and now that it had, the silence pressed down on her like a lead weight. "Captain Reeves," Halstead finally said, his voice low and measured, devoid of the usual sarcasm or scorn, "why wasn't this in your medical file?" Emily swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, the dryness crawling up to her eyes. It was, sir," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "After my last deployment it was documented, but when I was transferred, somehow the records didn't follow correctly. I tried to explain, but—" Her words faltered, suffocated by emotion, by exhaustion, by years of hidden pain. Halstead took a slow step closer, his expression unreadable. "So, you've been running like this?" His tone was quieter now, almost as if he were talking to himself, struggling to reconcile the captain he had mocked with the reality in front of him. Emily's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir, I've been running like this. Every PT session, every exercise, every evaluation. I've been pushing through the pain because I didn't want to be seen as weak, because I didn't want to be dismissed, because I've survived worse, sir. And I've tried to carry the unit without making anyone worry." The colonel's lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if reconsidering every word he might say. Around them, the soldiers watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief. Emily felt their eyes, their silent questions, their unspoken admiration. She had always strived to be more than herself, to set an example, to lead without complaint. And now, in this moment, she realized that the truth carried a weight far heavier than any physical pain she had endured. Halstead finally spoke again. "You've hidden this for months, for the entire company, and I didn't see it. I mocked you." His voice cracked slightly, betraying a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I told myself you were making excuses, that you were weak, that you were hiding behind an injury, and I was wrong." Emily blinked, the heat of the sun mingling with the sudden heat in her eyes. She wanted to respond, to say something sharp, something biting, to hold him accountable. But the weight of his admission, however delayed, grounded her words. Instead, she took a slow breath, feeling the sweat dripping from her hair, running down her temples, clinging to the strands of fabric against her skin. "I wasn't hiding, sir," she said finally, her voice firm, controlled. "I was surviving, and I've been trying to protect this unit, protect myself, and protect my career. But I've reached the limit. I can't hide anymore. Not today." Halstead's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the scar. For a long moment he said nothing, the only sound the distant hum of the bass, the shuffle of boots, the murmured conversations of soldiers who dared not break the tension in front of them. And then he took a step back, almost as if physically moving away from the weight of what he had assumed. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Emily's body began to tremble, not from exertion alone, but from the release of months of pent-up stress, fear, and pain. Her right leg throbbed violently, every nerve firing signals of exhaustion and warning. But she forced herself upright, pressing her palms against her thighs, feeling the heat of the track, the grit of the asphalt beneath her fingers, grounding herself in the physical world even as the emotional storm raged inside. Finally, the colonel spoke, voice firmer now but measured. "Captain Reeves, you should be in medical, immediately." Emily's throat tightened. She had expected this, but hearing the words from him, ordering, commanding, insisting, felt like a double-edged sword. Medical meant evaluation. Medical meant possible removal from duty. Medical meant admitting weakness in front of everyone she had led, everything she had built. Her chest constricted, and yet beneath that fear stirred something else, a flicker of vindication, of truth acknowledged. "I'll go, sir," she said, her voice steadying. But before she could move, she felt the subtle shift in the soldiers' formation. They were watching not just her struggle but her courage, her decision to finally reveal the truth. Some soldiers' faces were wide-eyed, some quiet, some nodding in respect. Emily's chest swelled with a complicated mixture of pride, relief, and dread. Halstead's voice came again, quieter now, almost reflective. "Captain, you've led this unit with courage. And yet you've carried a burden I failed to see. I misjudged you. We've all misjudged you." Emily paused, her leg throbbing, the sweat on her skin like a second layer of armor. "Sir, it wasn't just about me. It's about the unit. I've pushed myself because I didn't want them to doubt me, to doubt what we can accomplish together, and I've failed them in silence." Halstead nodded slowly, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way Emily had never seen. It was a brief, subtle acknowledgement of humanity, a crack in the hard facade he had worn since assuming command. For a moment, she thought she saw something in him, regret perhaps, or even a quiet respect. "Reeves," he said finally, voice firm, commanding again but softer than before, "you will report to medical. But we are not done talking. Not today. Not ever again until I understand exactly what you have endured and how far you are willing to go." Emily's stomach tightened. She understood the implication. This was no longer about a PT run. This was no longer about mockery or protocol. This was about recognition, about accountability, about facing the truth, hers, theirs, his. She nodded, gathering herself. Every nerve in her leg screamed in protest, every muscle aching from exertion and pain. She took a deep, slow breath, feeling the eyes of her soldiers on her. She had led them into countless exercises, missions, evaluations. And now, for the first time, she was leading them by example in a different way, showing vulnerability, resilience, and truth. The medic approached cautiously, carrying a small kit and a bottle of water. Emily's hands shook slightly as she reached out to accept it. She took a slow drink, feeling the cool liquid slide down her throat, grounding her, steadying her. Halstead stood nearby, silent but present. The soldiers began to disperse slowly, murmurs rippling through the formation, whispers of astonishment and respect. Emily felt a complex wave of emotions, relief, pride, fear, anticipation, and exhaustion, all colliding in her chest like a storm. And as she rose from the track, leg throbbing, scar exposed, and shoulders squared, Emily realized something profound. The truth had a weight, yes, but it also carried power. Power to liberate, to command respect, to finally be seen for what she had survived, what she had endured, and what she was capable of enduring still. The colonel's gaze followed her, sharp yet unreadable. Emily knew the conversation was far from over. This was only the beginning of a reckoning, one that would challenge her body, her career, and the very core of her identity as a soldier. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a strange flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. Because the field, the colonel, and the soldiers had witnessed her truth. And nothing could take that away. Emily Reeves walked beside the medic, each step deliberate, her posture rigid despite the burning in her right leg. The track receded behind her, the murmurs of soldiers fading into the hum of the bass. Every sound, the distant roar of a truck engine, the clang of equipment in the motor pool, the wind rustling through the sparse trees lining the compound, felt magnified, punctuating each heartbeat like a drum of tension. She had revealed her truth on the parade field, scar exposed, her body laid bare before the colonel and the unit. And yet, the weight of what was to come pressed even heavier than the pain in her leg. Medical awaited. Evaluation, documentation, potential restrictions, and decisions about her future, all hung like a guillotine over her head. She forced herself to inhale slowly, willing her body to comply, willing the tremor in her hands and legs to subside. But even as she steadied herself, she couldn't escape the unrelenting sensation that her life had shifted in an irreversible way. Inside the medical bay, the sterile smell of antiseptic and disinfectant hit her, a stark contrast to the gritty, sun-baked air of the parade field. She nodded to the nurse who led her to a gurney, then lowered herself carefully, mindful of the throbbing nerve in her leg. Her fingers brushed the fabric of her PT pants again, tracing the outline of the scar that had been both her secret and her shield. The nurse gave a professional, neutral nod. "Captain Reeves, Dr. Lawson will be with you shortly." Emily exhaled, letting the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. She tried to distract herself, glancing around at the medical charts, the anatomical diagrams on the walls, the shelves lined with sterile instruments. Yet nothing could quiet the memory of the colonel's gaze on the track, the hush of the soldiers, the murmurs of disbelief and respect. Every step she had taken, every challenge she had endured had led to this moment. A confrontation not just with her body, but with authority, perception, and legacy. The door opened, and Dr. Lawson stepped inside. A man in his mid-40s, tall and precise, with a calm, analytical presence that contrasted sharply with the raw intensity of the track just hours before. His eyes flicked to Emily's leg immediately, registering the scar, the residual swelling, the subtle tremor in her muscles. "Captain Reeves," he said, voice professional but not unkind. "I've reviewed your file partially. I understand you've been experiencing significant pain and that you've been pushing yourself despite prior injuries." Emily nodded. "Yes, sir, I've managed for months. I thought I could handle it, but—" Her voice trailed off, weighed down by exhaustion, emotion, and fear. Dr. Lawson pulled up a stool and gestured for her to lift her pant leg. Emily hesitated only briefly before complying, exposing the scar in full view once more. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the ridges and puckered texture of the flesh, casting shadows that made the injury appear almost three-dimensional, as if the skin itself told a story of fire, shrapnel, and survival. Dr. Lawson's fingers traced the scar lightly, noting irregularities, tissue damage, and nerve involvement. "This is extensive," he said softly, almost reverently. "You've been through significant trauma. It's remarkable that you functioned at the level you have. And yet, the nerve damage here is severe. Continuing PT or rigorous activity without proper intervention could cause permanent disability." Emily's chest tightened. I know, sir. That's why I had to reveal it. I couldn't keep hiding, not today." Dr. Lawson nodded, his expression somber. "Good. Recognition of limits is the first step in recovery. And yet the determination you've displayed, it's extraordinary. Most soldiers would have been sidelined, demoralized, or worse. You've survived and you've thrived against immense odds." Emily's eyes stung. The words weren't mockery, weren't derision, weren't empty praise. They were acknowledgement. And for a woman who had spent years hiding pain, deflecting attention, and proving herself in a world that expected perfection, acknowledgement was heavier, more profound, and infinitely more terrifying than praise. Before she could respond, the door opened again. Halstead entered, his boots clicking softly on the sterile floor. Emily's chest constricted. She had not expected him to follow, and yet here he was, a looming presence once again, this time tempered by what she had revealed. The colonel's eyes scanned her scar, her posture, her expression, and then he spoke, quieter than before, but with gravity. "Captain Reeves, I owe you an apology. Not for the run, not for the mocking. I owe you recognition. Recognition for surviving a war, for leading despite pain, and for having the courage to reveal the truth when most would continue hiding." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to respond, to nod, to say something, anything, but words faltered, caught between relief and the lingering sting of pride and fear. Halstead took a step closer, lowering his voice further. "You should know, I've faced situations where I failed to see the full picture. I've judged, assumed, and dismissed, sometimes with devastating consequences. Today, I saw a truth I cannot unsee, and it changes the way I will lead this unit from this day forward." Emily swallowed hard, realizing that the colonel's admission carried more weight than any reprimand, any mockery, any test he could have imposed. For the first time, she saw the man not as an untouchable authority, but as someone capable of reflection, acknowledgement, and perhaps respect. Dr. Lawson cleared his throat, drawing Emily's attention back. "We'll need to develop a detailed recovery plan, physical therapy, targeted exercises, and a gradual reintegration into full PT and duty. You've been pushing too hard, too fast, but with proper care, you can regain function and prevent permanent damage." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Relief and apprehension warred within her. Relief because she had survived the exposure, the scrutiny, the judgment. Apprehension because the path ahead was still uncertain, the road to recovery long, and the pressure to maintain command unrelenting. Halstead spoke again, softer this time, almost as a private acknowledgement. "Captain, you've taught me something today. Courage isn't just running through pain. Courage is showing the truth, and you've done that better than anyone I've ever known." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent months, years, even masking pain, proving worth, hiding scars. And now, in this sterile, quiet room, she realized that vulnerability did not mean weakness. It meant strength, resilience, and authenticity. The door opened once more, and a few soldiers stepped in quietly, bringing water, notebooks, and quiet concern. Their eyes met Emily's, and she saw a mixture of awe, respect, and solidarity. She had always been their captain, but today she became something more, a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the human cost of leadership. Emily rose slowly, leaning slightly on the medic's arm. Every nerve in her leg screamed, every muscle burned, but she held herself upright. She had faced the colonel, faced the field, and faced herself. And now she faced the next challenge: recovery, rehabilitation, and the ongoing battle to prove that survival did not equate to limitation. Halstead nodded to her quietly, firmly, a silent promise that the judgment was over, the acknowledgement complete. Emily squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of the scar, the sweat, the pain, and the truth settle into a strange, steady rhythm. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer pretending. She was present, exposed, and yet stronger than ever. And in that moment, as the medical team began their assessment, Emily realized that the true test had only just begun. Not the run, not the parade, not the scrutiny of a colonel, but the reconciliation of survival, truth, and leadership. Because scars, visible or hidden, told a story of endurance that no mockery could erase. And Captain Emily Reeves, scarred, unbroken, and resolute, was ready to face the next chapter, whatever it held. The first session of physical therapy began in the early morning, when the base was quiet and the sun cast long, golden shadows across the concrete paths. Emily Reeves arrived at the rehabilitation center, her gait cautious, each step measured to minimize the shooting pain in her right leg. The scar, still raw with memory, pulsed beneath the fabric of her PT pants, a constant reminder of the explosion that had changed her life, and the months she had spent concealing its consequences from everyone around her. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of medical equipment. The bright fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floor, illuminating every detail of the room. Exercise mats, resistance bands, and a row of stationary bikes lined one side, while the other side held a set of weights and various machines designed to challenge the muscles, ligaments, and nerves of soldiers in recovery. Emily's eyes swept over it all, noting every detail with a soldier's precision, yet beneath her observation lingered fear. This was not a battlefield of bullets and explosions. It was a battlefield of pain, endurance, and vulnerability, one she had never learned to navigate. Her physical therapist, Sergeant First Class Maria Torres, greeted her with a warm but authoritative nod. Maria had been through her own share of combat injuries and rehabilitations, and her presence radiated experience, empathy, and unshakable discipline. She studied Emily's gait as she entered the room, her eyes narrowing slightly at the subtle limp, the tension in her shoulders, the controlled but strained motion of each step. "Captain Reeves," Maria began, voice calm but firm, "you've been through hell. I can see it in your movements, but surviving the battlefield doesn't mean you survived the aftermath. Today we start fixing that. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, are you ready?" Emily exhaled slowly. "Yes, Sergeant, ready." But as the words left her lips, her mind screamed with doubt. She had faced death in the desert, watched her unit crumble in fire, and survived injuries that should have ended her career. And yet now, the simple act of trusting her body, of exposing it to controlled pain, felt like stepping into a war zone once more. Maria guided her through a series of stretches first, carefully observing Emily's reactions. The first few movements were manageable, though they brought sharp reminders of the trauma hidden beneath her scar. Emily clenched her jaw and forced her limbs to comply, refusing to let even a flicker of pain show on her face. The sweat began to bead on her forehead, and her chest rose and fell with exertion, but she held herself upright. She had to. She was a leader, a survivor, a symbol to the soldiers who had watched her reveal her war wound days ago. "Good," Maria said, nodding the tension in her voice as much as her posture. "Now we push a little further. Controlled resistance. You'll feel pain, but it's pain that teaches your muscles, your nerves, your body what it needs to do to recover." The next hour was torture disguised as therapy. Emily's leg burned with every lift, every flex, every controlled stretch. The nerve damage flared unpredictably, sharp as lightning one moment, dull and throbbing the next. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to repeat the exercises, sweat pouring down her face, muscles trembling. The scar seemed to hum under her fingers, as if alive, reminding her of every second of the explosion, every surgery, every day she had spent pretending to be whole. Through it all, Maria watched silently, occasionally offering encouragement, sometimes adjusting Emily's posture or the angle of a stretch. "Don't fight it," Maria said at one point. "Let the pain guide you. You're not weak, you're human, and you survive things most people can't imagine." Emily swallowed hard, the words striking a chord deep within her. She was human, not invincible, not untouchable. Human. The acknowledgement of that truth, years in the making, hit her like a wave, sharp, overwhelming, cleansing. For the first time since the desert, she allowed herself to feel the weight of survival, the exhaustion of endurance, and the rawness of vulnerability. By mid-afternoon, she was exhausted, sweat-soaked, and trembling from exertion. Maria nodded, satisfied but firm. "Enough for today. You pushed well beyond what most soldiers would attempt on their first session. Rest, recover. We start again tomorrow." Emily collapsed onto a mat, her right leg throbbing, her chest heaving. But for all the pain, there was a strange sense of liberation. She had confronted her body, exposed it to scrutiny and strain, and survived. The revelation on the parade field had opened a door, and now she was walking through it, one painful, deliberate step at a time. As she left the rehabilitation center, the late afternoon sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the base in a warm, golden glow. Soldiers passed her on the path, some giving respectful nods, others offering quiet smiles. She noticed a change in their demeanor, a subtle shift from curiosity to respect, perhaps even awe. Emily realized that her revelation, her endurance, and her courage were rippling through the unit in ways she hadn't anticipated. The story of her scar, of the desert of survival, had become more than her secret. It was now a symbol. Back in her quarters, Emily allowed herself to finally sink into a chair. Her leg throbbed violently, every nerve alive with the day's exertion, but she welcomed it as evidence of movement, of progress, of engagement with the recovery process. She unrolled her PT pants slightly, gazing at the scar that had been her shield, her burden, and now her testament. Her phone buzzed with a message from one of her soldiers. "Captain, we've all been talking, you inspire us." "Thank you." Emily's chest tightened. Words could not capture the strange mix of pride, fear, relief, and exhaustion flooding her. She typed back a brief acknowledgement, careful not to overextend herself. The evening brought little relief. The pain in her leg was relentless, each step across her quarters a negotiation with her body, each movement a reminder of the long road ahead. She applied ice, elevated her leg, and traced the scar with her fingertips, feeling the raised edges, the uneven texture, the legacy of fire and survival. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams of the desert haunted her, flashes of explosions, fire, screaming, the smell of smoke and burning metal. She awoke several times, heart racing, body drenched in sweat, the scar throbbing under the thin sheet. Yet beneath the fear and pain was determination, a steady, unwavering commitment to endure. She had survived once. She would survive again. The next morning, Emily returned to the rehabilitation center, greeted by Maria's calm authority. "Today," Maria said, "we push the limits a little further. We build strength not just for PT, but for every mission, every challenge, every day you lead." Emily nodded, bracing herself. The exercises were more grueling, the pain sharper, but the sense of purpose steadied her. Every repetition, every flex, every tremor was a victory. Each movement was a declaration that she would not be broken, not by the desert, not by the injury, not by the colonel, not by circumstance. Later that afternoon, the colonel appeared unexpectedly outside the rehab center, observing the soldiers going about their duties. When he noticed Emily finishing a set of resistance exercises, sweat streaming, muscles trembling but determined, he stopped. For the first time since the parade field, Halstead allowed a small, subtle smile to cross his face. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, acknowledgement, and perhaps a quiet understanding. Emily caught his gaze and held it, a silent message passing between them. The truth had been revealed. Pain had been confronted, and resilience, not mockery, had emerged victorious. As the sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, Emily Reeves rose from the mat, exhausted, sweating, trembling, and alive. She had begun the long journey of recovery, a battle beyond the battlefield, one that tested not only her body but her spirit. And she knew, deep down, that the unit, the colonel, and the world would see her not just as a soldier, but as a survivor, a captain who bore her scars openly, fought through pain relentlessly, and led with a courage that transcended rank, expectation, and convention. The war wound, once hidden, had become her testament. The sun had barely risen when Emily Reeves arrived at the base's obstacle course. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked grass and gasoline from vehicles idling in the motor pool. She had trained on this course countless times, running drills, leading exercises, testing herself against every physical and mental barrier. But today was different. Today, the course wasn't just a test of endurance or skill. It was a test of survival, of truth, and of courage under scrutiny. Her right leg throbbed from the previous days, physical therapy sessions, a persistent reminder of the explosion that had altered her life forever. The scar, hidden beneath layers of PT fabric, pulsed like a live wire whenever she flexed. Yet as she stood at the starting line, the obstacle course sprawling ahead like a gauntlet, Emily felt a familiar surge. The adrenaline, the focus, the determination that had carried her through Iraq, through surgeries, and through months of hiding her injury from the colonel and the unit. Sergeant Torres was already there, clipboard in hand, observing silently. Halstead stood off to the side, arms crossed, his piercing gaze fixed on Emily. The soldiers lined up behind her, whispers rippling through the ranks. Some were shocked that she would attempt the course with her injury, others were in awe of her sheer audacity. "Captain Reeves," Halstead said, voice carrying over the morning breeze, "the obstacle course. No shortcuts, no exceptions. Show me what you're made of." Emily exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her chest, the burn in her lungs, the ache in her leg. She stepped forward, the thrum of nerves and determination mingling into a single, steady pulse. This was not about proving herself to him, or to anyone. This was about proving to herself that survival was not weakness, that pain did not define her limits, and that courage existed even when the body rebelled. The first obstacle was a high wall, slick with dew from the early morning. Emily planted her left foot, pushing off with the leg that bore her full weight, and swung herself upward. Pain shot through her right thigh as she landed awkwardly on top, but she gritted her teeth and pressed forward. Every muscle burned, every nerve screamed, but she moved with precision, forcing her body to obey her will. The rope climb was next. Soldiers had attempted it with ease, but Emily's right arm and leg refused to cooperate fully. The nerve pain flared as she pulled herself upward, each inch a battle of endurance. Sweat streamed down her face, stinging her eyes, mixing with dirt and determination. She reached the top, gasping, muscles trembling, and looked down at the course. The soldiers behind her watched in silence, some holding their breath, others exchanging glances of quiet respect. Next came the balance beams, narrow planks stretched over shallow ditches. Each step demanded control, concentration, and courage. Emily's leg wavered with every movement, the scar protesting each flex, each weight shift. But she refused to stop, refused to falter, refusing to give the obstacle even a hint of victory over her spirit. By the halfway point, sweat drenched her uniform, muscles screamed, and every nerve in her body felt as though it were on fire. Yet Emily pressed on. She had faced worse: gunfire, explosions, fire, sand, blood, and she had endured. This course, grueling as it was, could not break her. Then came the final challenge, a towering, angled cargo net. Soldiers had trained on it since boot camp, their hands gripping the rope with strength, their legs propelling them upward with precision. Emily's leg buckled the first time she tried, the nerve pain exploding like lightning through her hip and thigh. She fell back onto the ground, her chest heaving, sweat blinding her, arms shaking uncontrollably. Whispers rippled through the unit behind her. Some shook their heads, convinced she couldn't finish. Others exchanged looks of concern, unsure whether the captain had overestimated her capabilities. Emily collapsed briefly onto her hands, pressing her forehead into the dirt. She tasted blood from a cut lip, a remnant of the wall climb. Every instinct screamed at her to quit, to stop, to save herself from further injury. But then she remembered the desert. She remembered Iraq, the explosion, the chaos, the fire. She remembered lying in the sand, wounded, terrified, thinking she wouldn't survive. And she remembered something more: the relentless, unyielding determination that had pulled her back from the edge, that had refused to let death claim her, that had forced her to rise again and again. She inhaled, letting the hot air fill her lungs, and pushed herself upright. Each movement was agony, each flex of her leg a scream, but she forced herself forward. One hand over the rope, one foot onto the first rung. Another pull, another step. Pain, fear, doubt, they all collided in a single torrent, but Emily pressed on, each motion a declaration. She would not be defeated. Not by the course, not by the colonel, not by the injury, not by circumstance. By the time she reached the top of the cargo net, her uniform shredded, muscles quivering violently, sweat and dirt caked into every pore. Emily felt an overwhelming wave of emotion: exhaustion, relief, pride, and disbelief. She had done it. She had conquered the obstacle course that had humbled so many. She had done it on a damaged leg, scar exposed only to herself and the memory of what she had survived. From the sidelines, Halstead's expression softened. The hard, impenetrable mask of authority cracked slightly, revealing something almost unrecognizable: respect, awe, and perhaps even humility. The soldiers watched in stunned silence, then slowly began to clap, the sound swelling into a chorus of recognition. Sergeant Torres approached, a proud smile on her face. "You didn't just complete the course, Captain. You dominated it. Against every odds, every limitation, every expectation. This is remarkable." Emily let out a shaky laugh, chest heaving, sweat dripping into her eyes. "I just kept moving," she said, her voice ragged but steady. "One step at a time, that's all you can do." Halstead finally stepped forward, removing his hat in a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "Captain Reeves, you've shown something today that cannot be taught, commanded, or forced. You've shown courage, resilience, and leadership under conditions most could not endure. And you've earned every ounce of respect from me, the unit, and everyone who witnessed this." Emily's chest tightened. The validation, so long denied, so long withheld, carried more weight than any medal, any promotion, any recognition could. It wasn't about glory. It was about acknowledgement of the struggle, the pain, the survival, and the unwavering will to continue despite it all. The soldiers swarmed around her after the applause, offering quiet words of admiration and support. Emily's leg throbbed violently, muscles trembling, but she held herself upright, absorbing the moment. She had faced death in the desert. She had survived the aftermath of her injuries, and now she had faced the crucible of leadership and physical challenge, and emerged victorious. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the base, Emily Reeves allowed herself a rare smile. The path ahead, rehabilitation, leadership, survival, would be long and grueling. But she had proven something crucial: that courage existed not in perfection, not in invincibility, but in facing truth, confronting pain, and refusing to give in. And in that quiet, golden moment, she knew one undeniable truth: scars, wounds, and hardships were not weaknesses. They were proof of endurance. And Emily Reeves, scarred, battered, and unbroken, had proven that she could endure anything. The early morning fog clung to the parade field like a veil, softening the edges of the world yet amplifying the sharpness of every sound. Emily Reeves stood at the center of the field, the cool air prickling against her sweat-dampened skin. Her PT uniform clung to her, damp from exertion and the persistent humidity of Fort Bragg. But she felt grounded, strong, aware, and finally unburdened by the secret she had carried for months. The scar on her right thigh, still tender from the daily physical therapy and grueling exercises, pulsed faintly under the fabric, a quiet reminder of everything she had survived. Colonel Mark Halstead arrived with his usual measured stride, but there was something different about his presence. The mocking, imperious authority he had once wielded like a weapon had softened, replaced by a steady, watchful respect. Around them, the unit had gathered, not just to witness a PT session, but to witness something more profound: the culmination of months of struggle, pain, and revelation. "Captain Reeves," Halstead began, voice carrying across the field, "today you lead the unit in an evaluation, not just of your physical capability, but of leadership, resilience, and courage under pressure. Are you ready?" Emily inhaled, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. She allowed herself a rare smile, one that held exhaustion, pride, and determination all at once. "Yes, sir, I'm ready." The soldiers fell into formation, their movements precise, yet there was a shift in energy, a subtle acknowledgement that the captain before them was no ordinary leader. She had been tested, revealed, and proven, and now she embodied a level of courage and resilience that inspired without words. The evaluation began with the standard warm-up, followed by rigorous physical tests, obstacle courses, and endurance drills. Emily's right leg throbbed with every step, every movement, yet she pressed forward, commanding herself and leading by example. Each stride, each pull-up, each sprint across the field was a testament not just to survival, but to mastery over pain, fear, and expectation. When the soldiers reached the rope climb, Emily took the lead. Her hands gripped the coarse fibers, muscles trembling from exertion, the scar in her thigh screaming with every motion. She ascended deliberately, slowly, each inch a battle against memory, against nerve damage, against the relentless voice of doubt. Reaching the top, she paused, gazing down at the formation below. The unit watched in silence. There was no doubt in their eyes, only respect, admiration, and the quiet realization that their captain had endured far more than they could imagine. Some soldiers whispered among themselves, astonished that the woman who had endured a battlefield explosion, months of hidden pain, and relentless scrutiny could now lead them through the toughest physical evaluation they had faced in months. The final obstacle was the wall, a vertical barrier that had humbled even the strongest soldiers. Emily planted her left foot, swung herself upward, her right leg forcing her to adjust, compensate, push through pain that shot like electricity up her hip. Her muscles quivered violently, sweat dripping into her eyes, but she refused to yield. With a final surge, she pulled herself over the top, landing hard on the other side. Silence followed for a beat, a heartbeat suspended in time, before Halstead's hand came down in a sharp, deliberate clap. "Captain Reeves," he said, voice loud enough to carry across the field, "lead this unit as you just led yourself, with courage, resilience, and unwavering resolve." The soldiers erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the base, carrying with them awe, respect, and a deepened sense of unity. Emily allowed herself a breath, shaky and ragged, yet filled with triumph. She had faced every expectation, every judgment, every lingering doubt, and had surpassed them all. After the evaluation, Halstead approached her privately, the weight of his gaze soft but intense. "Captain, what you've shown these past weeks, on the field, in rehabilitation in front of this unit, transcends what most would ever endure. You've led by example, not by rank or protocol, but by raw courage and truth. This unit is stronger because of you. I am stronger as a leader because of you." Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to articulate the tumult of emotion roiling inside her, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, she nodded, letting the acknowledgement settle, both as a validation and a quiet reminder of the battles she had fought and survived. That evening, Emily returned to her quarters, the sun dipping low, casting the base in shades of gold and crimson. She collapsed into her chair, her legs sore, muscles trembling but her spirit unbroken. Her phone buzzed, a message from a soldier. "Captain, today was incredible. Thank you for showing us what courage really means." A second message followed. "You've earned our respect forever." Emily's chest ached, not from the physical exertion but from the weight of recognition. She had been judged, mocked, scrutinized, and dismissed, and now she was seen. Seen not as a soldier hiding her pain, but as a leader, survivor, and example. Later that night, she traced the scar on her leg again, running her fingers over the ridges and puckered texture. This was no longer a hidden wound, a secret burden, or a mark of shame. It was a testament, a living record of courage, endurance, and survival. She had carried it through battlefields, surgeries, rigorous PT, and judgment, and now it was a symbol of triumph. Sleep came at last, deep and unbroken. Dreams were no longer haunted by explosions or fear. Instead, she dreamed of running freely, strong and unyielding, her soldiers beside her, the base alive with motion, determination, and quiet pride. The scar pulsed softly beneath the skin, a heartbeat of memory, resilience, and victory. The next morning, the unit gathered for a debrief. Halstead addressed the soldiers, his tone steady and commanding yet tinged with respect. This evaluation was more than physical. It was a lesson in leadership, resilience, and truth. Captain Reeves has set a standard that goes beyond PT or protocol. Today, we witnessed courage in its purest form. The soldiers erupted in cheers again, and Emily felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, pride, and accomplishment. She had endured, revealed, and triumphed, not just physically, but emotionally, socially, and morally. The mockery of the past, the judgment of others, the hidden pain, all had culminated in this moment of acknowledgement and respect. Halstead approached her afterward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Captain Reeves, you have changed the way I see leadership, courage, and strength. I am proud to have you in this unit." Emily exhaled, a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude flooding her chest. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "But it's not just me. The unit, the team, we all survived together. We all pushed each other. That's what makes us strong." The colonel nodded, a subtle but genuine smile crossing his face. "Yes, Captain, and now they and I know exactly what that strength looks like." As the soldiers dispersed, Emily remained for a moment, gazing across the parade field where just weeks ago she had stood exposed, scar revealed, vulnerable yet unyielding. The scar itself had become a symbol, not of injury, not of weakness, but of survival, courage, and triumph. She flexed her leg gently, feeling the muscle respond, feeling the nerve stir, and smiled faintly. There would be challenges ahead: rehabilitation, leadership, and the ongoing demands of military life. But Emily knew this. She had survived the battlefield, the judgment, and the pain. She had revealed her truth, faced the crucible of expectation, and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger than ever. The sun rose higher, painting the field in light. Soldiers moved in formation, boots striking rhythm against the pavement. Emily Reeves, scarred, resilient, and unyielding, walked among them, not just as a captain, but as a testament to endurance, courage, and the unshakable power of truth. And as she led her unit into the next exercise, each step firm, each motion deliberate, Emily felt something she hadn't in years: complete, unshakable confidence. The war wound that had once been a secret burden had become her greatest strength. Because true courage, she realized, isn't the absence of pain or fear. It's the choice to rise again and again, despite them.